Pay attention to Bernadette Walker, 20 years old, walking alone through the brightly lit streets of Reykjavik at 5 in the morning. She has less than 2 hours left to live. Because Thomas Miller Olsen, 34, a Greenlandic fisherman with a dark secret, is cruising these same streets in a red rental car. On this day, Bernadette just wants to make it home safely. On this day, Thomas has other plans. On paper, Thomas Miller Olsen was just another working fisherman from Greenland. 34 years old, crew member aboard the 65-meter trawler Polar Nanook, he'd spent most of his adult life following the seasonal fishing routes that connected Greenland's icy waters to Iceland's busy harbors. To customs officials stamping his passport, to rental car agents processing his paperwork, to bartenders serving him drinks in Reykjavik's establishments, Thomas appeared unremarkable. Another foreign worker taking advantage of shore leave to experience Iceland's famous nightlife. But beneath that surface of maritime normalcy lurked something far more dangerous. Thomas carried a criminal record for drug trafficking, specifically buying and selling hashish, though that barely scratched the surface of his capacity for violence. What made him particularly dangerous wasn't just his willingness to commit crimes, but his ability to blend seamlessly into legitimate society. Fellow crew members would later describe him as quiet, unremarkable, the kind of person who performed his duties without complaint and kept to himself during long voyages. On that fateful Friday evening in January, while Bernadette prepared for another night of innocent fun with friends, Thomas had different plans entirely. He'd rented a small red Kia from a local agency, ostensibly for sightseeing during the Polar Nanook's port call. But Thomas wasn't interested in Iceland's famous waterfalls or northern lights. He was prowling the streets of downtown Reykjavik, looking for something else entirely. Something that would transform a young woman's final night of freedom into the beginning of a nightmare that would horrify an entire nation. The evening unfolded exactly as Bernadette had hoped. She and her friends started at their regular bar, sharing drinks and playing cards as the stress of another work week melted away. The atmosphere was perfect, that particular combination of relaxation and anticipation that Friday nights bring to young people everywhere. As hours passed and spirits lifted, the group made their way to Hera, the nightclub that had become Bernadette's second home. Hera represented everything Bernadette loved about Reykjavik's nightlife. The venue featured live music from both local and international artists, a dance floor that seemed to pulse with its own energy, and a crowd of regulars who had become like extended family. Security footage from that night would later show Bernadette doing what she did best, being the first person brave enough to get on stage and dance, encouraging others to join her, transforming strangers into friends through the universal language of music and movement. As the night progressed, Bernadette's energy remained high while her friends began to fade. By 2 in the morning, most of her group was ready to call it a night, but Bernadette was just hitting her stride. The music was perfect, the atmosphere electric, and she wasn't ready for the magic to end. Her friends understood, they'd seen this before. In the heart of Iceland's capital, where the northern lights dance across snow-covered rooftops and the crime rate remains among the world's lowest, Bernadette Walker lived the kind of life that seemed crafted from pure joy. Bernadette was perfectly safe in Reykjavik, a city where violent crime was virtually non-existent and young women regularly walked home alone without fear. So they said their goodbyes, exchanged the usual promises to text when everyone got home safely, and left Bernadette to enjoy the remainder of her night. She danced until the lights came on at 5 in the morning, until the last song faded and the staff began cleaning up. Only then did she finally accept that her perfect Friday night was over. It was time to go home to her father's house, maybe grab some food on the way, catch a few hours of sleep before her Saturday shift. What happened next would be preserved forever on Reykjavik's network of surveillance cameras, creating a minute-by-minute record of Bernadette's final moments of freedom. After leaving Hera, she stopped at a local takeaway stand and purchased a falafel pita, the kind of late-night food decision familiar to anyone who's ever closed down a nightclub. Security footage captured her making this purchase, shows her counting out coins with the careful precision of someone who'd had a few drinks but remained functional. From there, she began walking toward Laugaveggur, Reykjavik's main shopping street. Even at 5 in the morning, the area was brightly lit with glowing storefronts and illuminated lampposts, creating an atmosphere of safety and normalcy. The temperature had dropped to -9 degrees Celsius, with wind chill making the air particularly brutal. But Bernadette was dressed appropriately for the weather. Black Doc Marten boots, black jeans, a gray sweater, and a black hoodie. Her red hair hung loose around her shoulders, and white earbuds dangled around her neck. The surveillance cameras told a story of a young woman who had clearly enjoyed her evening. Footage shows her accidentally bumping into strangers on the pavement, dropping coins outside a shop, walking with the slightly unsteady gait of someone who was intoxicated but not dangerously so. She passed the yellow and red awning of the Lebowski bar, then a coffee shop backing onto a street corner where a narrow lane led down toward the sea. At exactly 5 in the morning, surveillance cameras captured Bernadette for the final time. She appeared on footage from a camera positioned on Lagavager Street, walking alone through the early morning darkness, completely unaware that she was being watched. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Bernadette Walker alive. After this moment, she simply vanished. As if the cold Icelandic night had swallowed her whole, Saturday morning brought the first signs that something was terribly wrong. Bernadette was scheduled to work alongside Maria, her longtime best friend and coworker. The two women had maintained the same weekend routine for months. Whoever closed down the nightclub would text the other when they got home safely. Then they'd compare notes about their respective evenings during their Saturday shift. But when Maria arrived at the fashion boutique that morning, Bernadette was nowhere to be found. This was completely out of character. Bernadette was reliable to the point of obsessiveness about work schedules. If she was going to be late or miss a shift, she would call hours in advance with detailed explanations and apologies. The fact that she hadn't shown up without any communication immediately raised red flags for Maria. When she tried calling Bernadette's mobile phone, it went straight to voicemail, another alarming deviation from normal behavior. The 20-year-old redhead possessed what her friends called an infectious laugh, the kind that could fill an entire room and make strangers turn their heads, not in annoyance, but with the unconscious hope of joining whatever conversation had sparked such genuine happiness. Bernadette was practically attached to her phone, using it for music, social media, and constant communication with friends and family. Maria immediately began reaching out to Bernadette's other friends from the previous evening. The responses she received only deepened the mystery. Nobody had seen Bernadette since approximately 2 in the morning, when the group had left her at Hera to continue her night alone. Everyone assumed she'd made it home safely. After all, this was Iceland, where young women regularly walked home alone without incident. The next logical step was contacting Bernadette's mother, Sarah. But when Maria called, Sarah's response sent chills through everyone involved. She hadn't heard from her daughter since their routine Friday afternoon check-in call. Given that Bernadette spoke to her mother every single day without exception, sometimes multiple times, this silence was more than unusual. It was unprecedented. Sarah's maternal instincts kicked into overdrive, and by that afternoon, she had contacted Reykjavik police to file a missing persons report. Iceland's police force treated Bernadette's disappearance as a high-priority case from the very beginning. In a country where serious violent crime was almost non-existent, the sudden vanishing of a young woman in the capital city represented an unprecedented crisis. Within 24 hours of Sarah filing the missing persons report, investigators had assigned their most experienced detective to lead the case. Detective Inspector Grimmer Grimson, a 30-year veteran with an unmatched track record for solving complex cases. Grimson was the kind of investigator who had seen everything Iceland's criminal justice system could offer. Over 3 decades, he'd handled everything from petty theft to major fraud cases, had survived multiple avalanches while posted in remote northern regions, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot inconsistencies in witness statements and physical evidence. Only recently returned to Reykjavik after years in the countryside, he'd specifically requested assignment to the capital because he missed the intellectual challenge of complex investigations. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered the extensive surveillance footage documenting Bernadette's movements through downtown Reykjavik. Frame by frame, they traced her path from Hera nightclub to the falafel stand, then along Lagavager Street to her final appearance on camera. But equally important was what else the cameras captured. A small red car traveling in the opposite direction, passing the Lebowski bar less than 30 seconds after Bernadette appeared in that location. The timing was too precise to be coincidental, but the license plate was frustratingly illegible in the footage. When investigators checked Iceland's national vehicle database, they discovered more than 100 cars matching the same make, model, and color. What had initially seemed like a promising lead suddenly became a needle in a haystack investigation, requiring methodical elimination of dozens of potential suspects. Bernadette worked as a sales assistant at one of Reykjavik's trendy fashion boutiques, but that title barely captured who she was. Coworkers would later describe her as the person who remembered everyone's birthday, who stayed late to help struggling customers find the perfect outfit, who turned mundane Tuesday shifts into impromptu dance parties when the right song came on the store's speakers. Meanwhile, police also attempted to track Bernadette's movements through her mobile phone's GPS data. This effort yielded a crucial piece of information. Her phone had last connected to a cell tower near Hafnarfjordur, an industrial port town approximately 6 miles south of Reykjavik. The location was significant because it represented a completely different direction from where Bernadette should have been heading to reach her father's house in Breedholt. As news of Bernadette's disappearance spread across Iceland through social media and traditional news outlets, the entire nation seemed to mobilize in response. Sarah's Facebook post about her missing daughter went viral within hours, shared thousands of times as Icelanders grappled with the unthinkable possibility that someone could simply vanish from the streets of their famously safe capital city. Within 3 days, massive volunteer search efforts were underway, coordinated by professional emergency services but powered by ordinary citizens who felt compelled to help find Bernadette. The focus of these search efforts quickly shifted to the Hafnarfjordur area, where Bernadette's phone had last registered its location. Hundreds of volunteers combed through industrial areas, searched abandoned buildings, and methodically covered every inch of the rocky coastline. The landscape around Hafnarfjordur was harsh and unforgiving, a mixture of volcanic rock formations, industrial facilities, and fishing infrastructure that could easily conceal evidence of foul play. On January 16th, just 3 days after Bernadette's disappearance, two brothers participating in the search made the discovery that everyone had been dreading. While searching near the Atlantic Solia supply station, an industrial facility adjacent to Hafnarfjordur harbor, they spotted something unusual on a patch of open ground. Upon closer inspection, they realized they'd found a pair of black Doc Marten boots, the exact style and size that Bernadette had been wearing in the surveillance footage. Police quickly confirmed that the boots belonged to Bernadette, marking the first concrete physical evidence linking her to the Hafnarfjordur area. But rather than providing closure, this discovery only deepened the mystery and heightened fears about what had happened to her. Why were her boots in this remote industrial area? How had she traveled from downtown Reykjavik to this location? And most disturbingly, where was Bernadette herself? While search volunteers combed through the harsh landscape around Hafnarfjordur, Detective Inspector Grimson and his team were analyzing additional surveillance footage from the harbor area itself. What they discovered would crack the case wide open and reveal the true scope of the evil that had befallen Bernadette Walker. Security cameras at the harbor had captured the same red car from downtown Reykjavik, now clearly identifiable, parked near a massive fishing vessel called the Polar Nanuk. The footage, time-stamped at 6 in the morning on Saturday, showed a man stumbling drunkenly from the passenger side of the red car toward the Polar Nanuk. But more importantly, this time the camera angle allowed investigators to read the license plate clearly. A quick check with rental car companies revealed that the vehicle had been rented by someone connected to the fishing vessel, Thomas Miller Olsen, a 34-year-old crew member from Greenland. Investigators immediately located and impounded the rental car, but what they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come. Despite the fact that Thomas had returned the car to the rental agency and it had subsequently been cleaned and rented to another family, police forensics team found traces of blood on the back seat. Even more disturbing, the new renters had complained about a persistent smell in the vehicle that professional cleaning couldn't eliminate. She lived with her father in the quiet suburb of Breidholt, maintaining close relationships with both parents despite their divorce years earlier. Daily phone calls with her mother, Sarah, were as routine as morning coffee. Laboratory analysis confirmed investigators' worst fears: the blood belonged to Bernadette Walker. Additionally, examination of the vehicle revealed significant damage to the undercarriage, suggesting it had been driven off-road through terrain where small rental cars weren't meant to go. The odometer showed over 300 kilometers of additional mileage during Thomas's rental period, far more than could be explained by normal city driving or even sightseeing trips around Reykjavik. With mounting physical evidence pointing directly to Thomas Miller Olsen, Icelandic police faced a significant challenge. Their primary suspect was no longer in their jurisdiction. The Polar Nanuk had departed Icelandic waters and was now more than 100 miles away, operating in Greenlandic territorial waters. Thomas was effectively beyond the reach of Icelandic law enforcement, protected by international maritime law and the sovereignty of his home country. But as word spread aboard the Polar Nanuk about the investigation into the red rental car, Thomas's behavior became increasingly erratic. Fellow crew members later reported that when he learned about the police interest in his shore leave activities, he went pale and became so panicked that the ship's medical officer had to sedate him. His extreme reaction only reinforced suspicions about his involvement in Bernadette's disappearance. However, the Polar Nautic's captain proved to be an unexpected hero in this international drama. Upon learning about the investigation and understanding the diplomatic complexities that could prevent justice, he made a decision that would prove crucial to the case. He announced to his crew that the ship was experiencing engine problems and needed to return to Icelandic waters for repairs. He also disabled the vessel's Wi-Fi system, preventing crew members from accessing news about the investigation or communicating with contacts on shore. As soon as the Polar Nautic crossed back into Icelandic territorial waters, 6 members of Iceland's elite Viking Squad, the country's top tactical police unit, rappelled onto the deck from helicopters and arrested Thomas Miller Olsen. They also detained his drinking companion from that Friday night, a crew member named Nicholas, who had been with Thomas during his shore leave activities. The dramatic arrest marked the end of an international chase and the beginning of a complex investigation into exactly what had happened to Bernadette Walker. Under interrogation, both Thomas and Nicholas denied any involvement in harming Bernadette Walker. Their initial story painted a picture of an innocent night out that had taken an unexpected turn. According to their statements, Nicholas had taken a taxi from the harbor to downtown Reykjavik, where he spent the evening drinking at an English pub just off Laugavegir. He claimed to have won 8 beers by spinning a lucky wheel game, becoming heavily intoxicated before Thomas joined him later in the evening. The men claimed that while driving around Reykjavik in the early morning hours, Bernadette and another woman had voluntarily entered their rental car. Nicholas maintained that he was so drunk he remembered virtually no details after this point, having passed out during the drive to the harbor. But if Bernadette had one true passion beyond her family and work, it was music. Every Friday night, without exception, she would transform from responsible shop employee to vibrant partygoer, hitting Reykjavik's bars and nightclubs with the same enthusiasm others reserved for major life events. She knew every bouncer by name, every DJ's favorite tracks, every bartender's recommended cocktail. Thomas provided more specifics, claiming that after dropping Nicholas at the Polar Nautic, he drove to a secluded area of the harbor where he engaged in consensual intimate activity with Bernadette before dropping both women off at a local roundabout. But investigators had evidence that contradicted every aspect of Thomas's story. Surveillance footage showed him leaving the harbor area at approximately 7 in the morning, not 5 in the morning as he claimed. More damning still, additional footage captured Thomas at a local shop purchasing cleaning supplies, behavior that suggested he was trying to eliminate evidence rather than simply ending a consensual encounter. Physical evidence also contradicted Thomas's version of events. When police examined him following his arrest, they documented scratch marks across his chest that suggested a violent struggle. Even more incriminating, a search of Thomas's cabin aboard the Polar Nautic revealed 23 kilograms of hashish with a street value of approximately 1.4 million pounds. Hidden among his personal possessions, investigators also discovered Bernadette's driver's license, which Thomas had apparently kept as some kind of trophy. On January 22nd, 9 days after Bernadette Walker vanished from Reykjavik streets, more than 830 volunteers continued searching Iceland's rugged coastline for any trace of the missing young woman. The search had become a national obsession, with Icelanders from every corner of their small island nation contributing time, resources, and expertise to the effort. Coast Guard helicopters flew daily missions along the treacherous shoreline, their crews scanning thousands of square meters of black volcanic rock and frigid Atlantic waters. At approximately 11 in the morning, a Coast Guard helicopter flying low over the coastline near South Holmes Lighthouse spotted something unusual among the rocks below. In stark contrast to the dark volcanic stones that lined Iceland's shore, crew members observed a large, pale object near the water's edge. The location was particularly treacherous, not a typical beach with sand or pebbles, but a harsh landscape of cliffs and jagged rock formations where the Atlantic Ocean met the land in perpetual violence. What they discovered confirmed everyone's deepest fears. The pale object was Bernadette Walker's body, finally returned by the sea after 9 days of uncertainty and hope. The discovery marked the end of a search that had captivated Iceland and the beginning of a forensic investigation that would reveal the full scope of the evil that had been committed against an innocent young woman whose only crime was walking home alone on a Friday night. The autopsy results painted a horrific picture of Bernadette's final moments. Medical examiners determined that she had suffered blunt force trauma to her face and had been strangled nearly to the point of death. However, the most heartbreaking revelation was that Bernadette had not died from these violent attacks. Instead, she had ultimately drowned in the freezing waters of the Atlantic Ocean, suggesting that Thomas had left her alive but helpless in a location where survival was impossible. Music wasn't just entertainment for Bernadette, it was her language of joy, her way of connecting with the world. Iceland grieved for Bernadette Walker as if she had been every citizen's daughter. In downtown Reykjavik, thousands of people participated in candlelight vigils, walking the same streets where Bernadette had taken her final steps and leaving flowers at the locations where surveillance cameras had captured her final moments of freedom. The outpouring of grief was unprecedented in Icelandic history, reflecting not just sadness about one young woman's fate, but a collective loss of innocence about their country's safety. Bernadette's funeral service was held at Iceland's largest church and attended by more than 2,000 people, including both the country's president and prime minister. The service became a celebration of not just Bernadette's life, but of the values she had represented: joy, kindness, trust in others, and the simple belief that a young woman should be safe walking home alone in her own city. Her death had shattered those assumptions and forced Iceland to confront the reality that evil could intrude even into their peaceful society. When Thomas Miller Olsen's trial began in August 2017, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Advanced forensic analysis had identified his DNA on the laces of Bernadette's boots, and Norwegian forensic scientists had confirmed his fingerprints on her driver's license. The prosecution methodically demolished every aspect of Thomas's changing stories, demonstrating beyond reasonable doubt that he had abducted, brutally assaulted, and murdered Bernadette Walker. In a final act of cowardice, Thomas attempted to blame his fellow crew member Nicholas for the murder, spinning an elaborate new version of events in which he claimed to have left the scene before any violence occurred. This desperate lie fooled nobody in the courtroom and only served to underscore the depth of his moral corruption. The man who had brutally murdered an innocent young woman was now willing to destroy another person's life to avoid accountability for his own actions. In November 2018, Thomas Miller Olsen was found guilty of murdering Bernadette Walker and of drug trafficking charges related to the hashish discovered in his cabin. He was sentenced to 19 years in prison and ordered to pay 29 million krona in costs and compensation. However, many observers felt that this sentence was inadequate given the premeditated nature of his crime and the suffering he had inflicted on Bernadette and her family. Perhaps most frustratingly, Thomas has never revealed his motive for attacking Bernadette Walker. He continues to maintain his innocence despite overwhelming evidence of his guilt, robbing Bernadette's family and friends of any understanding of why their beloved daughter and friend was targeted for such senseless violence. His refusal to accept responsibility represents one final act of cruelty against those who loved Bernadette most. Despite the evil that claimed her life, Bernadette Walker is remembered not as a victim, but as a young woman who embodied everything beautiful about living life fully and fearlessly. Her friends and family continue to celebrate her memory through annual gatherings that feature music, dancing, and the kind of joyful celebration that made Bernadette herself so special. Friday, January 13, 2017, began like every other Friday in Bernadette's world. After a busy shift handling the post-holiday rush of customers returning Christmas gifts and shopping the sales, she was ready to celebrate another week's end. Her best friend Maria, whom she'd known since primary school and now worked alongside, was supposed to join her that evening. In their determination to honor her life rather than dwell on her death, they ensure that Thomas Miller Olsen's violence represents only the end of Bernadette's story, not its meaning. Iceland itself was forever changed by Bernadette's murder. While the country remains one of the safest in the world, her death served as a stark reminder that evil can intrude anywhere, and that the innocence and trust that make societies beautiful also make them vulnerable. Yet rather than becoming fearful or cynical, Icelanders have chosen to honor Bernadette's memory by maintaining the openness and community spirit that she represented. Bernadette Walker lived 20 years of pure light, nurturing relationships, pursuing joy, sharing her infectious enthusiasm with everyone she encountered. She represents the truth that even in a world where monsters like Thomas Miller Olsen exist, the capacity for love, friendship, and celebration ultimately defines human experience. Her final walk home ended in tragedy. but her life stands as proof that goodness is real, powerful, and worthy of protection. In remembering Bernadette Walker, we choose to see not the darkness that claimed her, but the radiant spirit that continues to inspire everyone who heard her story. She deserved to make it safely home that Friday night. She deserved to wake up Saturday morning with nothing more serious to worry about than a hangover and the upcoming work shift. She deserved to live the full, beautiful life that stretched out before her like an endless dance floor waiting for her next joyful steps. That such a life was cut short by senseless violence is a tragedy that will echo through the hearts of all who loved her. But that such a life existed at all, that 20 years of pure goodness walked among us, remains a gift that not even death can steal away. The plan was simple: drinks at their favorite local bar, card games, laughter, then dancing at Hera, one of downtown Reykjavik's premier nightclubs.